Chapter 11 Icevein and Stormswind. Our spies might be able to steal maps, but what if the drive is damaged? They say we have years until the Amaya leaves, but will that be sufficient to repair and piece together technology we barely understand? Circa 7 days, 22 hours, since the assassination of rebel leadership. Estingai tried her best to keep a handle on her emotions as Aiden and Maryatla went over the casualty report from Nightstone. Is there anyone alive that we've found? She finally snapped. Maryatla blinked, cheeks coloring. She glanced at Aiden, mouth working silently for a moment, then frowned, giving a small shake of her head. No. The Lightforged was very thorough, just as you said. Taking a deep breath, Estingai tucked that away, along with the pit that had gnawed at her insides every day since she'd returned from that base. Very well. What about resources? I know there were at least a few crates stored in the caves. Maryatla's expression brightened at that, and Aiden spoke up, nodding. It seems you interrupted the Lightforged before it could eliminate the base's resources, Aiden said. We've recovered enough food and water that we won't have to ration until the next supply tip we get from our mole. Estingai nodded. That would put them in a much stronger bargaining position with Icevein, as they wouldn't have much need for their low-light farms. What about biogems and georural tech? Melora's people were always working on something, and they tended to hit the Amaya almost exclusively for georural supplies other than food and water. We found a lot of raw materials and what we believe are georurals, but we've yet to test most of them. They're drained. So we loaded them onto crates and figured we would test them when we got here. Aiden's words should have given Estingai some relief, but none came. She'd gained near priceless resources for her people, but at the cost of so many allies, friends, and even family. Take everything from the base, Estingai said. Clothing, chairs, pipes, everything we can remove without making ourselves known. And if the other factions use that as fuel for their rumors about us having something to do with their former leaders' deaths? Aiden asked. Estingai shrugged. We can't control what they say. If they want the resources, they'll have to deal with us. Maryatla nodded, a bit of a smile on her lips. Understood. Estingai's jaw clenched reflexively, knowing what was on the woman's mind. She said nothing, though. The other replacement faction heads would be here any minute. She didn't want to be caught arguing. Aiden cleared his throat, and Estingai glanced at him to find him nodding almost imperceptibly to her left. Following his gaze, she found Uldina, the replacement Stormswind leader, and Meika, the replacement Icevein leader, walking toward them with two of Estingai's people as their escort. Their own guards and aides would be kept waiting back near the entrance. Meika, Tepio's widow, looked almost eager for some reason, where Uldina, Kogan's former right hand, bore an unreadable expression as she peered around the base. They'd chosen to meet in the speeder hangar, a cavernous chamber less prone to echoes than most after the salvage of dampening materials from Ghostmine that they'd restricted and camouflaged the entrance to. It was a relatively public place that wouldn't make the other leaders feel closed in and would show Uldina and Meika a frozen phantom that continued to run efficiently despite its recent losses. That was in no small part due to Aiden and Maryatla. Estingai could help keep the soldiers busy with work so they didn't get into trouble and provide words of assurance when needed, but she wouldn't know where to begin with all the civilian factors of running the base. When the guards stopped a few paces away, saluting Maryatla and Estingai before heading back to their posts, Estingai took a moment to study the two leaders. Meika was tall, even for an Atari, with red-orange skin and a large, shaggy mane of black hair. She wore what looked like a traditional wrap, though this was dark gray, no colorful patterns, over the more common, rough, armored clothing worn by most in the factions. The outfit worked, but Estingai still thought it a bit impractical. Estingai wore only her armored jacket and pants, Uldina bore the blue-violet skin common to Yusanariti, but her lack of antlers and the black rings on her neck and jaw indicated mixed parentage, as did her slender jaw and full lips. Uldina's expression as she studied them, particularly Estingai, made Estingai want Mariatla to take the lead even more. Mariatla was someone they could understand, and Estingai was not. She recognized the look. As one of the Knights Reborn, Estingai had always represented strength and maybe even a bit of hope. But she'd also been the other, someone too far above everyone else, too mystical or powerful for most people to trust or feel comfortable just talking to. Combat changed that, and she'd gotten along well with most soldiers. But officers and diplomats had never let their guard down with her. Svamaku had never had a problem with that. He'd always been able to make people show more vulnerability after talking with them for just a short while. I shouldn't even be here. I'm no good at this. Mariatla and Aiden had insisted that her presence would help, however. It projected strength. And I need to watch these two. Just in case. Estingai drew a deep, shuddering breath and had to look away for a moment. Memories of Tepio and Kogan and their respective guards walking into that underground chamber came to the forefront of Estingai's mind. She saw them standing around that solitary, plain table, arguing, then working together. Estingai clenched her teeth, heart pounding. She saw the Death Knight cut down their guards, remembered their terrified faces as the stones above them cracked, then rained down upon them. Estingai hadn't known either of them very well, and she hadn't liked Tepio. She still felt responsible. Rima brought us there to protect them, and I failed. Knight Estingai, Uldina said, inclining her head. Thank you for your invitation. Estingai blinked and struggled to school her expression at the awkwardly formal address. She'd known her armored jacket would have that effect, but didn't think it would be that off-putting. Is it because she has something to hide? Estingai said nothing, letting Mariatla take the lead as Meika offered a similar greeting. We welcome you to Wolfden, Estingai's companion said. You no doubt have read the report we sent regarding Nightstone? Meika blinked, but nodded. It is disturbing news. We've tried to find a silver lining in the catastrophe, Aiden said, voice strained. Our people are gathering Nightstone's resources as we recover the bodies for a proper funeral. Estingai's throat tightened. We haven't even had one for Svamaku and Rima yet. She glanced between Uldina and Meika. Have they been able to mourn their leaders? Estingai didn't know if she would welcome a funeral, even if it felt wrong that almost 2 weeks had passed without one. People stopped during a funeral. They reflected and tried to comfort themselves in the absence of their loved ones, tried to find some meaning in their deaths. That wouldn't work for Estingai. The only comfort she wanted was Svemaku's embrace. There had been no higher meaning behind having him ripped away from her. If she slowed down enough for a funeral, then she would have time to think about something other than moving forward. That was dangerous. Better to just work herself to exhaustion and pass out into a dreamless sleep. Estingai pushed the thoughts away, then blinked when she realized the others were looking at her. Sorry, I was thinking over some logistical matters. What did you ask? Uldina spoke up. The report you sent us. Did you really kill a Lightforged? The initial response that popped into Estingai's head felt too harsh. So she tried to think of what Karuxi or Svamaku would say. She held Udina's gaze for a moment, then shrugged. I thought it would add some color to the report. Oldina and Meika stared at her, seeming confused, and Estingai held back a frown, looking to Mariatla for help. Her quip hadn't been that bad, had it? Maybe now she'll see I'm no good at this. The woman took over, turning to logistics and the benefits of allying and moving their people between the different bases to share labor and specialized workers. Aiden made sure to mention their contacts within the Amaya and hint at the specific resources they could acquire that the other faction heads needed, such as chemicals for fertilizer, limestone for filtering water, and the proper metals and materials for creating ammunition and repairing vehicles. Estingai remained silent, watching the other leaders. That last bit about their contacts and pooling their resources made them lean in a bit closer. But Oldina still seemed wary to Estingai. Meika's comments were all pointed toward leadership. Ah, that's why. She sees this as an opportunity to take control. And how would we decide where the food and tools go once we produce them? Meika asked. Will it be on a rotational system, or do you plan to keep control over that, since you have Nightstone's resources to bargain with? Mariatla and Aiden engaged with the other leader. But Estinga ground her teeth, annoyed. It always comes down to that. No matter that vying for power is what got us into this in the first place. That never changed, and it made Estingai want to throttle someone. Taking a deep breath, fists clenched, Estingai tried to think of what Karuxi would do. Tried to find some solution that didn't involve beating someone into submission. She couldn't. For a moment, that threatened to break her. They were the ones who could do this sort of thing, not her. If she couldn't. No. Svimaku is gone, and I sent Karuxi off to do something even more important. I can't keep relying on them. She'd never been able to do things their way anyway. Excuse me for a moment, she said before starting out of the garage toward her workshop. She'd probably interrupted someone. She didn't care. What mattered was that she'd thrown them off. She could feel their eyes following her as she left the cavern for one of the smaller tunnels. She was about to shock them even further. When Estingai returned 16 minutes later, she had to hide a grin at the shock on everyone's faces. Uldina and Meika gaped openly, and Mariatla and Aiden looked stunned. Even the mechanics and the workers moving around the garage stopped to stare at her, shying away if she walked past them. Estingai didn't blame them. She wished she could have given everyone else warning, but that would have meant missing Uldina and Meika's dumbfounded, almost terrified expressions. As she approached, Mariatla's wide-eyed stare turned into a grin, and Aiden's followed a moment later. Thank you for waiting, Estingai said as she stopped before them. I'd kept this in my workshop, repairing what I damaged and trying to reverse engineer what I could, and understand how the enhancements work. It's taken some time, but I find it's good to keep busy. The armor wasn't in as good repair as she would have liked, but all the pieces were wearable. Estingai had plans for making the mask a bit more striking, but wore that at her hip for now, next to her own. Is that the armor of a Lightforged? Estingai supplied. Yes. I took it off the body of the one I killed at Ghostmine. She took a moment to look between the four leaders, then settled her gaze between Uldina and Meika. I'm sure you all must have worked out an agreement already, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of the benefits of joining our factions. In addition to receiving access to our intelligence networks within the Amaya, you will be under the protection of the only person in the Remnant that has taken down a Lightforged single-handedly. I can promise them that, at least. The Remnant? Uldina asked. Thoughts of the Death Knight tried to surface once more, but Estingai shoved them back down and nodded. That's what we are now. The last of those who opposed the Amaya. The remnant of the armies of the night. Maka frowned at that, but Waldina actually smiled. I like the sound of that. I expect you'll be in charge? Maka asked. Estingai looked to her, then Uldina, and shook her head. Mariatla and Aiden will tell you I'm no good at that. I'm just the one that kills anything the Amaya sends after us.